next speaker, who is Matt Decuir, and he is going to tell us about developer hiring trends and give us some job search advice for this great resignation time. Let's go, Matt.
Thanks, Antoinette. All right. Thanks, Antoinette, for the intro. Abby, I cannot believe that was the first time you've ever publicly spoken before. That was so good. It's a hard act to follow. So we're talking today about developer hiring trends and some job search advice. I'm Matt Decuir. I'm a senior software engineer at Drip, and I'm supposed to tell you that we are also hiring. I'm also the founder of Invisible Network, which is an anonymous job search platform. It's focused specifically on helping connect developers with employers, and we make introductions through double opt-in introductions. I use he, him pronouns, and I self-identify as a mini-star superfan, so I am pumped to be here today. No joke, this is my favorite day of the entire year. So let's get into it. Trends from the last year. Remote work is here to stay. Salaries have inflated fast, and as some of you have seen, if you're hiring right now, the market right now for hiring is kind of bananas. So let's talk about remote work first. On the job seeker side, and I should say this data comes from Invisible Network, and so how Invisible Network works is it's kind of like an inverted job board where candidates share that they're looking for work, and it's all anonymous to protect their privacy and reduce bias. And one of the questions we ask is about their preferences and feelings about remote work. And so that's what we're looking at here. The sort of most important compelling takeaway is that in Q1 2020, right before the pandemic hit, around 17% of job seekers preferred to work fully remote. Fast forward to today, that number has doubled. There's also an interesting trend in here where Q4 of 2020 and Q1 of 2021 where job seekers said, I don't want to go back to the office. That's since dialed back a tiny bit, but generally speaking, remote work is a preference on the job seeker side. On the employer side, and again, this data comes from Invisible Network, and so this is, generally speaking, the majority is tech companies here in the Twin Cities. It's sort of on the smaller but growing side, and so that's sort of the universe that we're looking at here. Again, at the very beginning of the pandemic, in 2020 of Q1, 41% of employers preferred on-site work. Fast forward to today, and that's at 0%. And the story that I would tell here is that it's not necessarily that employers no longer prefer on-site work. It's more that they've grudgingly accepted hybrid work, and that the future of working includes some aspect of remote. And that's a really good positive trend, if you're a job seeker who prefers to work remote. In terms of salaries, salary inflation is very, very real. So I've got some high-level sort of like TLDR trends here. I would love to nerd out with you, but I could do this for hours, so I'm trying to keep this sort of concise. On the left-hand side, you've got the different experience levels, and I should say years of experience is really a proxy for competence. And so looking at the sort of the chart, I would encourage you to take pictures too if you'd like to refer back to this later. There's this sort of like broad range of, and again, this is job seeker data from Invisible Network. And so what we're looking at is sort of the clusters of where job seeker salary ranges fall. And so in 2021, for entry level, for example, the range is 60 to 100K. And relative to the last year, the top end of that range is up by 20 grand. And I would personally recommend a target, whether you're an entry-level developer or if you're hiring entry-level developers, is to put your target around 75K. And so as you go down the list, you can see that the ranges and how they've changed from year to year, and also my recommended targets. The one data point, as you get to the sort of senior and experience end of the spectrum, like 5 years of experience or above, last year, the sort of highest local salary I saw for almost any developer was in the 140K range. And actually, just like in recent weeks and months, that number has ballooned to 170K. I've heard that from multiple sort of very senior engineers. And then the last trend here is that employers still prefer to hire senior, which if you're somebody who sees the growing trend with junior devs who are up and coming, it's really frustrating. And this is a trend that I've seen over the last 5, 6 years or so, ever since I myself was a junior dev. And it's sort of just like a supply and demand mismatch. And so on the low supply, high demand side, you've got these more experienced folks. And on the inverted axis, you've got less experienced folks who are in high supply and in low demand. So what does all this mean? For experienced devs, you get the privilege to be very choosy and very picky. Unfortunately, this means that junior devs continue to largely be ignored. And if you're an employer, you've already seen that hiring is very competitive right now. So getting into advice, we're going to talk first about job search advice. The one important takeaway, if you're looking for a gig, this is the one thing I want you to walk away with, which is that people get jobs through other people, not through applying online. And so I have like a sort of general process that I've seen personally that consistently works. And so I'd strongly recommend that you sort of follow this process. I see a lot of you taking pictures, that's great. Step one is to write up your dream job description, right? Like if you could pick and choose what you're working on, who you're working with, sort of what sort of company you're at, what industry, like if you could write your own ticket, what would it look like? And I think this is a really important step in the process because this gives you something to compare potential opportunities to so that you can say, oh yeah, this recruiter hit me up on LinkedIn and offered me this really interesting role, but it's nowhere close to what I actually defined as my ideal gig. Once you've written that dream job description, the next step is to go look for companies, not jobs explicitly, looking for companies that align with what you're looking for. And from there, networking is like a fuzzy, gross word to me, but you want to talk to folks at each of these different companies. And after, maybe later at the happy hour, we can talk more about networking and how to approach that. But the important part is to figure out a way to talk to somebody who works at that company for a sort of informal, informational meeting. So you can gauge, for one, is it a good place to work? And for two, is it a place that you feel mutually, like there might be a potential mutual fit there. And then after you've had these conversations, the important thing is to follow up. Definitely say thank you. If you're taking time out of somebody who's busy's day, just appreciating and acknowledging that goes a long way. But then also beyond saying thank you, you want to follow up if there are potential opportunities at the company, either that are existing today or might be happening in the future, and sort of ask for the introduction to meet the next person in the process to sort of get the ball rolling. And then, I mean, the rest of this I'll sort of gloss over, is sort of like interview, get an offer, negotiate, always negotiate. And then you sort of repeat that process until you've gotten to a definitive, yes, there could be potential here, or no, I'm not interested. And I should say I've written up sort of in further detail on the blog, sort of my like the full end-to-end how I approach the job search process. And so this is sort of the abridged version that you're getting today. So for junior devs, specific advice for junior devs, the hard truth is that on paper you all look the same. I know it probably hurts to hear that, but if you think about, you went through a boot camp, if you compare your resume to all of the other folks in your cohort's resumes, you'll probably see how eerily similar they are. And you got to think about from like a hiring manager's perspective that they're seeing a stack of resumes and they all look the same. And so the big question is, what differentiates you? And once you've thought through that, the next step is that you need to sort of like be able to tell your own story. And you need to be able to tell it in a really compelling way. There's an exercise that I really like to, that I suggest to almost everyone, which is, it's kind of like writing your superhero origin story, but instead of your superhero origin story, it's your software engineering origin story. And the outcome of it is hopefully an explanation from you, like this is for you exclusively. This is not something that you necessarily need to share publicly, but this is for you to explain to whoever it is that, like, this is why, in your past experience, how your brain works, whatever it is, this is why you know deep down that software engineering is the right career path for you. And if you can tell that story, you're in great shape. And we already touched on this, but I'm going to repeat it again because it's so important, is it's not just about what you know, it's not about how smart you are, it's more about who you know. And I know that that's kind of like it's also a vague statement. So if you're hanging out at the happy hour later, you can bump into some new folks. And lastly, I just want to give you a little pep talk. It's going to be hard, but you can totally do this. And again, I've written a sort of longer form, more comprehensive post with my advice for junior devs on the blog. That's at blog.invisiblenetwork.com. So on the experience side, I said this before, I'll say it again, you get to be very, very picky. It's almost like you can work for any company you want to work for, which is a sort of weird thing to think about. What we've seen in terms of the most in-demand skills lately, modern JavaScript and mobile. And when I say modern JavaScript, I mean TypeScript, React, Node, Vue, Angular. Node's in there twice because it's so important, apparently. And then with mobile, like React Native, Swift, Java, Kotlin, those are the sort of most like highly sought after skills. And advice in terms of like on the backend side of things, you're really probably just looking for alignment on backend tech stacks. It's not necessarily to say that one backend stack is more highly sought after than another. It's more that, you know, if you're a Python dev, you're probably not going to fit well at a .NET shop, and vice versa. And then I'd firmly recommend that you be clear on what you're looking for and also know what you're worth. And so hopefully you took a screenshot of that salary slide earlier. And there's one unexpected trend that's been it's a surprise, but it also kind of makes sense, which is that folks who have been longtime freelancers are taking full-time salaried gigs. And if you add up the trends that we already talked about in terms of remote work all of a sudden being much more commonplace, salaries going up fast, folks who have traditionally wanted to freelance, they're looking to work on their own terms. And so a lot of that is they want to work remote. A lot of that is they want to be compensated well. And now, faced with remote works everywhere and pay is going up, the stability of a full-time salaried gig and also sort of like the opportunities to solve new and interesting problems and like have a team, and then also like not having to worry about drumming up business and clients, like all of that is very attractive. And to me, it makes perfect sense. So then on the employer side, as you've already seen, it's a really tight market right now. I would recommend that you bump your salaries up 10 to 20K, probably more, just given how fast things are moving. You definitely want to know what you're looking for in advance. And so we touched on these a tiny bit, but in-demand skills are going to cost you more. And they're also going to be harder to find. So like React Native and mobile, those things. I've also seen almost every employer is looking for senior front-end developers, which is to say, if everybody's looking for it, that's going to make it even harder for you to find that too. We talked about this a tiny bit already. Experienced devs, you know, they're highly sought after, they're picky, they're expensive. On the opposite end of the spectrum, junior devs are plentiful, diverse, and eager. And beyond like attracting these people, you also want to optimize for the developer experience like once you've hired them. And so like paying well, for example, is no longer enough. As Abby's talk very clearly shows, you really need to understand and support your employees in that we are still in a global pandemic and nobody's home life situation is ideal at the moment. And so giving people the flexibility, understanding, and support to sort of deal with their own personal stuff in addition to the work that you need them to do is really important. And even if like whether you're hiring or not, you probably want to make retaining your existing employees a top priority. And what I mean by that is, if your salaries are low relative to the market, you probably want to consider giving some big out-of-cycle pay raises. Otherwise, you know, the unsolicited recruiter messages on LinkedIn, you know, offering upwards of 200 grand might be very attractive. And this is something that I, like selfishly, I just want to see more, is I would love to see more 4-day work weeks. I feel like this is something that a lot of like employees, you know, candidates, job seekers are asking for and would like. I personally would love it. It just makes sense. I haven't seen a ton of employers implementing this, but I've seen a few starting. So I think that might be like directionally where we're headed. And I mean, just to paint a picture, if you've got all these things covered, everything on this list, if you start to do, right, you give your employees the support and flexibility that they need, you offer a 4-day work week, you pay competitive salaries, you're setting yourself up for an environment where people are going to want to stick around for a long time. And that's sort of like the ultimate goal here. So we haven't talked at all about diversity yet. And this is something that's really important. The data here for this chart comes from Stack Overflow, which is a little bit suspect, but the important thing is the directional trends. And so the sort of purple solid bar, that represents white cisgendered men. This is all developers. And as you, on the horizontal axis is experience. So as you go up the experience spectrum, at the very high end, around 80% of all developers are white cisgendered men. And then as you go down the experience spectrum, that percentage decreases. So at the bottom end of the spectrum, on the entry level and junior side, it's closer to 60%, which means the other 40% are these historically marginalized and underrepresented folks. And I mean, if you're looking at this, I think it's pretty obvious that if diversity is a priority, you really need to be open to hiring junior. And as we've already sort of talked about, like optimizing for the experience your employees have at work, it's not just enough to bring them into your organization. You also need to invest in and support these junior folks to help them become the rock star members of your team that you'd like them to become as well. And so I've given talks like this a number of times in the last handful of years. I see a lot of friends in the audience, and I've been hammering home this point that employers should be open to hiring junior. And I wanted to sort of, given the spirit of Ministar and that this is a community-oriented and community-driven thing, I want to challenge all the folks in the room. Like it doesn't have to necessarily be developers. Like for experienced folks, the question is, how can you open the door for somebody more junior? And that can manifest in many different ways. For starters, you can start asking the hard questions at work about if you're open to hiring junior, and start advocating for those changes to make it possible, to make it a reality. When you're interviewing at new companies, ask prospective employers if they hire junior, and if not, why not? I think putting pressure both from within and externally is not going to hurt anything. That's for sure. And then also, I mean, again, in the spirit of Ministar, if you're somebody who's on the experience end of the spectrum and you want to help a junior dev, maybe go on Twitter and use the minibar hashtag and tweet that you're game to help. And likewise, if you're on the junior side of things and you're looking for mentors, feel free to post on Twitter too. And then again, like there's some opportunities for getting together in person today later. So if anything else comes of it, that'd be fantastic. And with that, thank you so much. You can find me on the internet. I'm Experiment on Twitter, and invisiblenetwork.com is the URL for Invisible Network. Thank you so much.